Welcome to the Embodied Life podcast with Jake Potter. The Embodied Life podcast is brought to you by the Australian Centre for Embodied Practice, bringing the wisdom of the world's embodied and somatic practices together, intersecting deep thinking and embodied learning to restore goodness to ourselves and the world.
Hey Jake.
I'd just love to start by hearing your relationship to being a little embodied human. Whatever that meant to you, however you can contextualize that, what it meant for you just to be embodied as you were young. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, teaching meditation now, I'm still a lot, when I teach. But as a little person, I was very rarely still. I was moving. I had a love of movement and a love of dynamism in movement. I think that the couch in our living room was like worn down from me running and jumping and doing front flips over it all the time. Like it was what my mother used to sort of get cross at me about. And I was a gymnast growing up, so training quite hard from about sort of 7, 8 years old. So quite intensely involved in working my body in a particular way. And then a lot of my friends were boys, so I was always kind of working to keep up with them and to show them that I had as much finesse in my movement. So I probably kind of worked it extra hard, that movement capacity. So it's sort of interesting that I don't recall a lot of time being really still when I was young. I was on the trampoline doing salts or somersaults. I was rap dancing classes, so I riding my bike, with a wind on me, my BMX. So I loved the feeling of movement. Yeah.
Is that something that are you still a somersaulter? Do you still get out there, or has your life largely kind of stilled down with your path into meditative practice?
I think I actually like I always have. I've always done yoga or dance and did a lot of dance in my early 20s and performance and things, but I think the mode of it kind of changed. I mean, this is just a story, but I remember being a gymnast and I remember being quite proud that I could do all these big tricks, and I loved them and I'd pull them out, on the beach or when people were around. I'd do like a round off and a back salt or something. I love that feeling of movement. And I used to say, I love the vault. The vault's my favourite apparatus, which is, pretty dynamic. Like you run and you have to then leap onto that horse and then somersault off. So it's pretty, I don't know, very directive. But then actually there was one year that my coach sort of asked me to start taking dance classes where the movement was much more sensuous and sort of slow, and where I could actually feel myself more. And it was sort of a bit of a revelation. I remember being 12 and just feeling this slowness and feeling my hips move and being a lot more in the movement in a different way, and being that is actually what I loved more, but I couldn't even sort of admit that to myself because I had an idea that I was a bit of this tomboy and this fast mover who could pull these good tricks, that I loved, but it wasn't really capturing all of me.
Yeah. And it just kind of makes me think of, sort of listening to a lot of your work and reading your work of, you really bring the feminine into your work a lot. And I kind of just was like thinking about that as you're saying that, from being like a hyper masculine, doing all these crazy things, to then that slowing down. And now that's a really big part of your work, it seems.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think it is it's easy in this culture to be identified with action and being able to, perform things really well and to be really functional and to get shit done and to being able to sort of wield yourself in all different situations or whatever, we can sort of have an ideal about that. But to the slowing down and the sensuality and being able to really feel as another way of being, and the sensitivity inherent in that, being able to really feel, That's a whole nother art.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to not be running, so much I think of, I love all that masculine action, and I'm actually doing that more in my life now, like balancing them out. But if that doesn't have a sort of more calmer base or a capacity to relax and rest, it can also get very tired, and it can lose a certain sort of depth,
Yeah, totally. And then to kind of keep following that thread of the body. And I've personally been excited for this conversation. I mean, we met up a couple of weeks ago and had a great discussion around kind of very similar threads, but in these very diverse ways, from dance and meditation and this central piece of the body. So I'm curious, just to sort of start to begin the conversation of, I'm largely interested in, our embodiment being a huge contributing factor to well-being and to developing goodness, and in whatever way. I mean, there's a million ways to do this, and we all bring really value, and you bring something unique. Because often meditative practice can be maybe a little disembodied in certain traditions, but I think you bring something really unique to the embodiment of meditative practice. So I don't know where we should start with that, but I'm just wondering, what sort of comes to mind when you just start to think of the body, meditative practice, and the importance of bringing those together?
Beautiful. I think, just to follow what I was saying before, maybe a way in that, sometimes all of that incessant action and doing that we see in our culture, there's some point where I think there can be a lot of running in that and a movement away from certain things that we feel, and we see in our culture now the consequences of not looking clearly at certain issues in the life that are now have had, pretty awful consequences that we're dealing with, whatever it is, but that we can move over difficult things, And I think some of my movement that I was engaged in was also trying to move away from certain feelings in me because I was deeply sensitive, that were overwhelming or too much, and it was, a way I could kind of find my way through the life in this quick moving, agile girl at that time. And then there was a point, where that mode of being kind of hit a dead end, and something else needed to be answered in me. And there's a bigger story there that I don't need to go into, but that I would say is also still a bit of a masculine imposition that I was putting on my own being to sort of keep up with things in a way. But
to distract.
Just distract a little bit from the deeper sensitivity where there is so much aliveness and freshness, and something's really interesting there. So I got sort of yanked into stillness when I was 17, and had big questions about life, and was really wanting to, understand, well, really, what is freedom, and what is nourishment, and what is ease in the life. And I saw a lot of people kind of running to have this incessant fun, or to get the next fix, or to kind of keep everything kind of like up. And I sort of felt we could go deeper, and that's where I came in contact, I think, with the body. And the body the body is very, when we really enter the body can be very slow. The body will bring, a whole variety of feelings up for us to be with. Some beautiful, some can be very shocking, And I think we can, and the mind is very quick. So the mind will move very, very quickly. The mind, we'll have a feeling in the body, and then the mind will jump on that. Say we have worry in the body and anxiety in the body. I think a lot of people have these days. A feeling of restlessness, a feeling of shakiness, or maybe a sort of hollowness in the body. And if we haven't slowed down enough to meet that and to be with that, very quickly that will move into a panicked mind. And you'll be thinking, worrying about this happening in the future, or we'll move into all different sort of neuroses, that feel very real. Like this is going to happen, or everything's so terrible, or this is going to fuck up, or da-da-da. Or a lot of even imagery, if there's been, sort of trauma somewhere in the body, that can come out in a lot of disturbing imagery, or, thoughts coming in. So we can cut through a lot of the mind's elaborations by coming back and just staying with the body and meeting the body on its own terms, and the feeling in the body, and then what's in the body can actually move through. But very often it will move to the mind that wants to control the experience and will take us down some really dark lanes that feel very real, but are not, that govern our lives. You know, we're living in a sort of magical thinking, like a movie, and we can come back to a fresher, more sane reference point through the body.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm kind of like sensing, it's beautiful, this quality of, because I guess, you know, in hearing, you know, your sort of younger life is inherently embodied in the way of like being able to have big movement capacity. You can do somersaults, you can do all this kind of stuff, but the slowing down also in the body, but there's a certain qualitative difference there to like what it means to being embodied. That is just like, there's a shift that it's not a moving away from the body, but it seems like in the way that you're contextualizing, it's like there's a different attending to the body that allowed something else to be there. And it was slower, so less physical in muscle and bone activity, but attending to in a certain way. Yes.
Because I think in the quicker move, and what I'd say is both of those modes of being, I think, take enormous commitment and tenacity, you know, and we can easily think the movement one is more fantastic or something, you know, and we think to be able to be still in this culture and to sit with all that we experience without running away, without moving into compulsion, without just wanting to get up and do something really quickly to stay with ourselves, it's heroic, you know, to meet ourselves slowly and quietly, and what we have to learn to find the calm in our body to be with safely and to stay. I mean, I think that's as potent as a double back salt with twist. You know? And we can move a lot but have a very jacked up nervous system and not know how to be still and to, you know, feel a love for ourselves that's beyond what we achieve or what we don't achieve for another, really, to meet another openly. That takes us a nervous system that's got some capacity to relax and to open and to be here without an agenda of having to perform.
Yeah. And so there's this kind of like, I just like see this imagery of like a guarding of the body sort of shifting away and something else kind of comes to the surface, and that can be really, really painful. And that can be super hard. And in kind of the way that you're saying, it's like in the training that's involved to do 5 somersaults in a row and then tuck and curl and flip around. And
you know it.
Yeah.
Tuck and curl.
I don't really know it that well, but I've seen it in front and it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of training, and I'm, you know, just sitting with the reflection now and it takes a lot of training to just sit. It takes a lot of training to feel safe and comfortable, because the world is scary, and maybe the world seems more scary than it is because of what's happened to us, and to cultivate that essence of being with, it just seems beautiful and also a real practice.
Yeah, I really think it is, because I think that when we experience pain, it's just hard to be with. We don't, you know, and we will definitely usually react, you know, to find a solution that won't always really kind of cut it or answer it. You know, like that sort of experience of worry in the body, and so then you try and control everything in your life and keep all your benches really clean and, you know, whatever. We all have our strange ways of sort of managing, but learning to be with a raw sensation of worry and behold it, and then to let it move through. It can wash through and something deeper can actually open up in the body that's quite beautiful. But so often we just keep running as modern people. I call us the great runners. You know, we keep running, you know, until we're really on our ass or something terrible happens often that boxes us in, and then we're sort of enforced to stop. And we've just had lockdown, this kind of world enforcement to stop. And we don't give ourselves the chance, I think, for our system to renew itself and to come back to a quality of innocence and freshness in our attention that will come through slowing down, and there's real beauty there. You know, and so often pain will enact more pain. You know, like trauma will enact more trauma. We see that everywhere. And it needs a sort of something, at some point it needs to intercede and for us to do something differently. Instead of enacting more reaction, how can we stop and hold and meet that pain so it can wash through and something fresher can come forth? But that's not easy, because to stay in that discomfort, if you don't know that there's a way through, you're not going to do it, you know. You're going to want to get the hell away, you know.
Yeah. And it also makes me think, you know, to kind of keep going down this path of the body in this way of, you know, just to be transparent, last night I was like on YouTube and looking at all these videos that you'd done and, you know, having a look at all this stuff. And as I'd kind of watched a whole bunch before I went to sleep, a little, you know, the recommended ones come up on the side, and there was I don't know much about him, but this guy Sadhguru, who, whoever he is, I'm not, you know, exactly sure. I haven't looked into him too much, but he was doing a talk at Harvard Medical School.
Wow.
And they were talking about anesthesia. And, you know, there was this, you know, Western medical guy talking about, like, you know, what happens to the brain when we do anesthetics.
Interesting.
Yeah, and we put the brain to sleep, and then they kind of had this way of contextualizing the mind being in the brain, and you do these things to the brain. And he kind of, then Sadhguru came in and just started talking about, no, you know, the brain exists over, like, he sees that the brain exists in every cell and that we have memory in every cell. And I mean, we now know this, right, with the nervous system that just kind of goes through the whole body. And just thinking of, like, you know, often in the discourse of meditative practice, it's like to quieten the mind. And it's just making me think about, you know, to quieten the mind means to quieten the whole nervous system.
Yes.
It means to quieten the cells. It means to quieten the muscles. And so then there's this, like, mindedness that lives through the whole body. It's not just attack the thinking brain. There's, like, that whole nervous system. Like, what happens then when we quiet?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful way to put it, because I think sometimes meditation can be done not in that way. And I'm very passionate about it being done in that way, in a sort of foundational practice. And, you know, my main method or authorization to teach is through the Buddhist tradition. So I don't feel limited by that at all. I use the practices to become more human, you know. But the foundational practices, and what I teach a lot and I've engaged in a lot that's never ending, is a sort of calm abiding practice where you're learning to sort of settle your whole system, but not just the mind, through the whole of the body, to know what a relaxed, neutral body feels like. And the Buddha's example of this, he came to this kind of state after he'd been striving. He'd been doing his own somersaults with all the other hardcore dudes in the forest, you know. He was fucked, almost having a nervous breakdown for his so much intense effort. Was sitting under a rose apple tree, remembered being a kid and being at ease. And his body got really natural and he started to feel really good. And he slipped into this very easeful space, which is the sort of ground of a meditation practice, to have access to that. So we're looking from a system that we could say that feels safe and open. Because when we feel safe and open, we can think imaginatively, we can think less reactively, we can wonder, we can play. But so often that eludes us, that state, and we're wound up. And for myself, I've practiced since I was 17, but fuck, I still get wound up, you know? And the discipline to know what that state is, it would make the world a very different place if our leaders knew that state, you know, because you can feel other people, you're thinking empathically, you're thinking imaginatively, you're not in this reactive.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect kind of analogy of this time, being wound up. You know, there's some like hyper doing the somersaults are out there to prove or to be a certain person.
To prove.
Yeah. But there's this I'm curious to know, like, you know, you've been practicing for solid 15 years, more teaching for 10 more, yeah, so there's like a significant
practicing for like 26 gosh,
yeah
a long time.
I'm curious to know, in this sense of wound up, like what you've seen as a meditator that's sort of deeply involved in communities in Australia and in India and, you know, the States and all over, and this sense of being wound up. You know, we've obviously got a pandemic right now, but we also have a pandemic of phone use and everything that goes on in the world in 2021 is horrific in a lot of ways, and is no wonder why we feel wound up. Have you seen an increase of that as a teacher and as a practicer of kind of the world becoming tightened?
It's interesting, just to add what you're saying, that they say that we kind of in one day have more stimuli than someone 100 years ago would have in their whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, that
doesn't surprise me.
Our nervous system is having to reckon with.
Yeah.
How much more information we have, and part of that being wonderful that we can see into the intimacies of other people's lives across the oceans that we never could before, how that can connect us, but also how that can just madly overload us is so full on. So it's funny that question, because I've always just sort of seen this pattern in people of the reactivity and to move away from pain, so to not be able to get to the goods, So that's been a sort of continuous thread that I've witnessed, But I definitely feel things are more compounded now, and I definitely feel now that demand on the nervous system is pretty extreme. And I think it takes even more practice and support and laboratories of places where we can learn what it is to unwind and settle the system, to come back to more freshness, so that reactivity doesn't keep perpetuating itself into further harm, is essential. So my answer would be yes, I have seen that. But I also feel there's something very natural in, like I said, me getting wound up. Just to stay really awake to everything that's happening in the world and the environmental crisis. And I don't need to talk about this, but my own particular phase as a woman and what I'm sort of reckoning with also has its own sort of intensity. But that's not what I'm talking about here. But there is something in a meditation practice, in that when you start to get into that calm abiding, that everything that you've been running from that didn't get to fully live will want airspace, will want some time on the radio. All of the voices in us want to be heard, and if they're not, they start rattling. We see that personally, we see that politically, No one wants to be in a cage where they haven't been heard. So as you go deeper to in a calm abiding, there'll be times where deeper, more darker, more, unwanted material will arise, and you're not going the wrong way. That's because you've grown a container to be able to handle more of your own humanity and meet it. So sometimes I'm wound up. I could, probably sometimes for a lot of different reasons, but still practicing strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of, in one of your Dharma talks, you were describing this, and correct me if I get the terminology wrong, this Mara being a deity or of some kind. And
yes,
you were talking about,
yes.
There's a story of the Buddha, and he almost reaches enlightenment, like he's almost there. And then this Mara energy, which is, you can say more about it, but what I kind of got was like self-doubting and critical, and all the parts of us, in this context of just like the self-deprecating thoughts we have on ourselves. And I was just kind of thinking about, that then of this like polarity between, when we feel more safe or when we're reaching a certain level, sometimes those voices or that way of being that is terrible for us can just kick in hardcore, like straight to fifth gear.
Exactly.
Stronger
than ever.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I think, why we need the strong practice and support around us to be able to see, because yet Mara in the Buddhist tradition, I'd say, is like the personification of all that wants to undermine our capacity to be a potent, loving, shameless human being for no good reason, not because you've earned it or because, but just because you're here and you're part of this mystery and you're made of the same stuff as the earth, and Mara was with the Buddha his whole life. And right until the very end, like you say. And that insidious voice in us that will undermine. But it's also sort of in the traditions, Mara is sometimes articulated as Antaka, which is like the one who puts a limit on our experience. So whenever we think that our experience has a full stop or it's finite, that I'm going to be here forever, when we feel fixated in something, then there's Mara. Whenever you're gripping on tight, you're with Mara. Mara kind of like freezes the ocean into ice blocks, makes us feel that we're going to be stuck in some place the whole time. That's the function of Mara. And I do think as we start opening more, as we start going more in a way to bring more light to our experience, sometimes more dark will come to be aerated, you know. You have more capacity then, and to start to see Mara, because Mara deposits itself in our own thinking. It's not like it's outside of ourselves. It's in the voices that we think are ourself, that we've become so identified with that that's who I am. So that takes a pretty elegant use of mindfulness to start to see when Mara has entered our situation, because we don't see it. The Buddha had to see it. Like one time the Buddha had hurt his back, you know, and people have an idea that if you're enlightened, you don't feel pain or you don't cry or you don't feel loss for your loved ones or something, you know, that you just become this kind of immovable, steady rock. I don't know, you know, but I don't think it's quite like that. But the Buddha hurt his back and he lay down, and Mara came in with full force. Who do you think you are, this world teacher, lying down? You know, you wimp, basically, you know. Where's your somersaults, mate, you know? And the Buddha said, you know, you see him getting ruffled? We get ruffled, and then he gets his steadiness, which is a calm abiding practice again as a foundation to be able to see with that spaciousness. And he says, I lie down with compassion for all the people in the world that have sore backs. You know? So that entry point again is not merely fortifying and moving on, but stopping and softening and being able to open the heart. And that's like our doorway to, I suppose, a humanity, you know. You can do as much somersaults, but if you can't handle your own tears, we're probably going a bit too far in the way of sending rocket ships to the moon.
Yeah.
Before we know how to care for the flowers here, you know.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I love these kind of ideas of, you know, I hear you speak about it, it's like these entry points. Like we have all these kind of entry points, and I kind of love that because it seems like there's a certain quality of just like opens a door. Like it's not kind of the thing, but just like this doorway opens to a possibility. You know, maybe we don't get there time and time again, but just this like lovely sort of way of being, just like, this little door opens and there's a possibility if we can kind of walk through in that entry point of compassion or of, that steadiness. And
that's beautiful. I think there's so many little doorways to practice and to respond freshly. But when, like, as people now, like when we are up against such full-on things are happening right now, a lot which are, I think, fantastic, you know, and a lot which are really frightening. Our environmental situation is really, it's full on, you know, like you really it's really where we've got ourselves is intense, you know, and what young people come in have to deal with, you know. So I think to stay fresh with when there's that level of heat, I think that's what we're here to try to do. And that's going to take community and practice and, like I say, those sort of laboratories where there's a certain view that will help us keep unwinding and regenerating and loving as sometimes things go to shit, you know? Yeah, and the entry points to the entry points to respond differently when the heat's on. I think, you know, we can do that on our own in our practice, or sometimes we need a relational support to help us find that fresher ground when things are really intense. We need to come together as people and have good, honest conversations, you know. I think we need a lot now, not just the sitting practice. We need to come at this from a lot of angles to stay robust and sensitive and not numb out.
Yeah, and it kind of brings me, I guess, to like the conversation we're having earlier as we came in here, where we had to stop ourselves from talking so much. It's like, we need to save all of these conversations for the recording. Let's stop talking all the time. But I guess then like we have these like intersections, which is becoming more apparent, and I think, you know, beautifully recognized. And I think one thing I've appreciated about our conversations prior to this is both of our acknowledgement for integrative models and for having, you know, certain things. And you've been a psychotherapist for 10 years.
Not a psychotherapist, but
I'm psychotherapy.
Yes.
Sorry. And the different functions that it serves, you know, how meditation takes us a certain way, and then, good conversation and like the nitty gritty psychological work and, how they all sort of tie in together, because, you know, I think this has been talked about for, you know, quite a while now, and is, I guess, common language now of the spiritual bypass. I'm wondering if you can say anything about that. Like, you know, I was thinking about it when you were talking about, this is in a Dharma talk, of holding ourselves in like a cup of warmth, you know, like we create this space and, you know, we create this kind of steadiness to hold ourselves. And then often we have a beautiful opportunity just to let it go. But then it seems like in certain cases, there's a moment when sometimes just letting go of our experience can be too much. Just wondering if you can kind of say anything about that kind of like wavering, like sometimes best practice and then sometimes not. And just wondering how you think about that, because I know it's something that you've thought about a bit in your practice.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, why am I saying thank you? No, I have.
Thanks for thinking.
Thank you. Because I think we do have that's a point of shared interest and I think passion around these integrative models that can support people, because we have so many multitudes inside of us that don't all get answered in one place and shouldn't. I love that we are multidimensional. You can't box us in, you know. I'm not just a meditator no more than you're just a dancer, you know. And I love that I can cross different domains, and I think we all do, and we all want that. Any other way, I think, can be stifling to the spirit. But so a lot of my learning around that question you've asked me has come through trial and error and being in my own laboratory, was a laboratory of practice. And, you know, when I hit my own dead ends, I think we learn through our own errors and we sit with them honestly and we hold that, and then we, you know, find other kind of ways where you can't keep, you know, there's a wall, you can't keep going that way or you'll butt your head, you'll get a bloody head. You know, it's hard, but it's good learning, like learning in the boxing ring or something of lived experience. So for me, you know, in some ways, the traditions and the Buddhist tradition of practice, not that I think this is actually how it is, but it's very easy to think that the preferable way of being is self-reliant. You know, that I will come to a point where through my own inner resourcefulness, so understanding that I am not all that moves through me, you know, so being able to relate with experience with more open-handedly, with less fear, to be able to dive into all the experiences that we are, because ultimately none of them define us, that I'm something more open than all of that, is what a sort of Buddhist lens will give us. That I should be able to sit here, I can be with this, you know. The Buddha looks like that, I can be with this too. Now I can be with this. And I tried that, you know, like honestly, rigorously tried that. And there was a point where, you know, and thought and preference, sort of self-reliance, thought that was kind of like a good way to go. But deeper in me, I realized, you know, that there was, you know, I was still in some way learning to really, or didn't yet not know how, in a way, even though I'm deeply relational, how to really lean in on another. And part of that mode was sort of, you know, mistrust of like the relationality and leaning in and what community can bring, you know. And some things that happen to us that are inside of us need a conversation and need the warm hand of another, or need in certain, you know, developmental, psychological phases in our own life where we weren't equipped, or we missed out on something, or we weren't held in the way we needed to be, which is most of us. There'll be these kind of like gaping kind of holes in our growth that need attention. And I don't think they can happen just on the cushion. You could just be winding your head up again, because you don't, relationality, having another body there, the co-regulation of that, and the safety that can come through that, and the healing in relationship, you're not just going to get on your cushion. You're going to get through throwing yourself into the marketplace, you know, or with skilled practitioners like psychotherapists. And it's one of the wonderful things about being a modern person, aside from the challenges and how much we've sort of been uprooted from certain connections that other people have had, we have at our hands all of these possibilities and insights into being an integral human being and places to go. And my tradition and my teachers, we've always said, follow your instincts, use everything. But I think the ground of understanding the meditation can bring is so essential. But yeah, like where we spoke before, something about trauma, the nature of trauma is that you feel mistrust and you feel kind of like you've lost your docking, you're out free floating. And meditation on your own is not going to answer that, That needs relational holding and warmth and safety for that energy to be metabolized and moved through, in my experience. Yeah. So yeah, I think definitely you want to sort of be tracking things. And again, me, it's been trial and error in myself and with my students. And I'm a lot more, I think, versatile now in kind of saying this is what I can help you with, and you need to go somewhere else to kind of get support for that.
Yeah, no, and I think
that's a long answer, isn't it?
No, that's a great I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Because I would agree with you in that.
You'd agree with it,
yeah. Especially, in the trauma there at the end of, severe trauma, and then to go off into a cave and to do 10 years out there, and, we need the healing relationship. And I think just like...
And that's your work, isn't it? Because that's a lot of what you do.
Yeah, totally. And, I just kind of love, also that's the essence of you're bringing... my sense is, you're kind of bringing teachings that are thousands of years old and come from lineage into a modern context of like, how is this beneficial for us now? I say this all the time because I love it, is that, Stephen Jenkinson says like wisdom is place-based. And then something just rings around in my head all the time. And I kind of just love the feeling of kind of you sort of bringing all this that's sort of come behind you and from teachers and experience to like, how is this for us now, living in this place with these problems? I think that's beautiful. And I'm also curious, just to kind of like segue a little bit, another thing I was thinking about in sort of coming up to this conversation is this polarity, I guess, that you sort of speak about a lot in sort of different ways that I was sort of interpreting in your work of, you speak about this kind of doing, and sometimes being like aggression or anger. And I guess I was kind of thinking about in the context of like social change, like sometimes like when there's big stuff happening, we'll use an angry or an aggressive sort of force to move something. And you also talk about the, the paradox of like, what would be possible if we all softened and we had these elements of compassion. And, I know you sort of told a few stories of to really have compassion for another and to be soft with others, and kind of what opens up when we're soft and gentle and open. And so I don't know if you've got anything to say about that. I'm just kind of like throwing it in a really different direction, but it made me think of the social world in which we live in, and these like, this kind of aggressive sort of grunt.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's important, I think, because I'm into, I think we want to let all that's inside us live, and live to find its sort of healthy mode. So we can just talk about force. You use the words aggression, I think, about the force, but that could also be like just the force of like a wave or something, that's willing to be strong. And so that's something that I fully welcome, But so often things in our culture like femininity or masculinity, these notions and ideas, and of course this is all being so challenged and, questioned now for good reason, but they can get kind of like, we can become the sort of phantomine or something of these original energies that are really awesome and sort of raw and have a lot of mobilizing kind of movement, like good force. So where am I trying to go with your question? I suppose a few things is that, like in a meditation practice, it's not that we're just wanting to become these like calm, soft, peaceful, inactive beings, but it's ultimately, do we have a place to rest? Do we have a place where we can be in self-compassion and ease with our own being, that we can take off all the roles and just sit nakedly, whatever, in front of a river. I'm just a metaphor, but really be really open to our lives, because that's where the juice is for all of us. It doesn't matter, I don't think, where we're from, what our sexuality is, what culture we're from, what religion we're from. We all want to feel intimately part of, and held and loved, in this life. And that takes a level of vulnerability to be part of this, to know we are in this very interdependent network that we are intrinsically part of, and we're in it and we're known, So there's that. That I think ultimately we want, yeah? And then there's aggression, and then there's the force, and then there's the wild anger that many people have, for good reason, because they've been put in a cage that's rattling, yeah? For lots of different factors has led to that. We see, the cultural and colonialism and the patriarchy, all these, big things we're really eyeballing. And so there's going to be anger, and there's going to be need to have force and to speak up and to get yourself out there and to get yourself heard, that's important. And I suppose, so I'm just always sort of interested, how can they go along at the same time? How can we have dissent and we can fight against the injustice, but how at the same time, and I'm not one to tell someone else about this, I just speak for myself and my own students and how I work, but how at the same time can we have a regenerative movement, at the same time we're fostering life and we're fostering our own spirit to come into the communion with others that's going to be ultimately nourishing. Because I'd much prefer to be holding, like a swan in my hand than a gun, and we need that. So I feel we can be everything, but how do we be everything, and how do we move our energy out of its sort of deformities and the phantomines of it, so we can have force, we can make love strongly, we can receive, we can not be frightened of our energy. But how can we also do that healing, elegant work of our own vulnerability, that we're coming from a empathic place with our force? Because so often we see these polarizations, force without empathy. Oh yeah, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to fix this shit. There all the bad is, and we're going to just drive it through, And there's just it's just disconnected. Or you have this like, oh, everything's okay and we'll just be peaceful and let's just fade away, and meditation is just some cozy place and I just dress in white. It's all cool. No, it's not. Nothing cool about so much of the situation right now. But how can you know that and still find your peace? Because you are giving to the culture as much by fighting the peace, as also the fighting what needs the good fight, regenerating and fighting.
Yeah, it's beautiful, like fighting with compassion, but fighting in a way that holds that reverence continuously, and doesn't flip into that kind of anger, forceful, in that violent kind of
the
fashion.
Violent way that causes more harm, that's perpetuating again the trauma. And like your work, I know growing up, and a lot of students I have are activists, and I'm just like fully behind them. I'm incredibly impressed of people on the front lines of different issues, But you have also seen, people can also release a lot of anger in those places that is unresolved anger from deeper psychological issues that have not, that you're running from. And then you put it into this issue, and you're not going to really see that issue clearly because you've got your own agenda of wanting to feel powerful there and get your voice out. That's a level of disempowerment that's been worked through that place that won't be answered there because it's your own story. And that's the beautiful work of the psychotherapeutic, to really start to sort of get responsible for our own reactivity and why, and the compassion, so we can enter other spaces with more imagination and wider thinking, and really how are the solutions going to come here? How are we going to bridge these gaps? Is it through just this, pointing the finger? Does that work? Or is that elegant enough? Is that is that playful enough even to look at the different corners? I don't know.
Yeah. And long life questions to keep kind of...
They're long life,
they're
long life questions.
Because I think, psychotherapy sort of attends to this, big time. It's like, am I displacing my anger because, these people did this to me, and then there's this like good cause
exactly
that I'm going to go and, fight for, But in doing that, you're just releasing all the anger because of what happened to you 20 years ago or whatever. And I see meditation being such a beautiful practice in that is like, you know, this practice of like seeing clearly, you know, to sort of really see clearly. I know that in is thing I was reading of yours, I've actually got the thing here, but I don't have my phone on me. I took a picture of it because it's too long for me to write down.
Yeah.
But it was talking about, you know, the development of like razor sharp something. It was like razor sharp vision, or this sense of like razor sharpness.
Like Superman.
Yeah, I love that. I just love that because it's like to see so clearly, you know, just feels like an antidote to these problems of thinking in the world and problems of being able to hold complexity and, you know, to really, like in this context, understand what I'm fighting for. Am I partly fighting for the environment and fighting for my own dignity because of what happened? And they're two very separate things, and they get molded, but this razor sharp quality to discern. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. And I think that it clears things up, because then I think it does bring more elegance into the conversation, and more freedom for the other in a way, more respect actually in a way, because like you said, that like if you're going into a cause but really you haven't kind of owned where you feel really disempowered personally, you know, so you're putting all the disempowerment on the other. I've got to help these disempowered people or whatever. And then it's patronizing. It's like, oh, it's sort of, it's that same thing, like, well, you know, I know like in the Indigenous movement, it's like, you know, we need to make our own decisions, and we need to really, we need to make decisions for ourselves, and we need to be the ones in control. And you've got to look at what, instead of like coming in with some paternalistic attitude, let's look at, as white people, our own spiritual poverty that has led us to be able to see country in a certain way as just purely resources for the taking to benefit, you know, our own sort of systems, or what is it, you know, James Baldwin on race, like, I'm not your Negro. What does it say about someone that they need to have a lesser inferior what does that say about you, that you look like that? You've got some work to do, you know? So it's sort of, I think in a lot of, from a sort of feeling of uprootedness and disconnection that modern people have, that can make them terrible to others, you know? We've got to look at ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of in the ballpark, yeah? That's another big topic, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm also...
That's a very big topic. Yeah.
Well, I guess it makes me think about, you know, sitting on the mat and doing that work is social activism in some sense. You know, being, you know, and maybe this is not how you think about it, but like being, you know, psychological, sociological, cultural phenomena, the practice of, you know, like you were saying before, of being steady, of seeing clearly, of developing compassion within oneself, surely has to be a social force in some way, the work that you do.
I really, I do agree. I really do agree. You know what, there's a time-long saying, the personal is political and the political is personal, you know. I think as Gandhi said, you know, how can you expect world peace if you can't get along with yourself or your neighbour? You know, these kind of discords, inner discords that we have psychologically are reflected wider. I do think that the micro and the macro dance between. And I do feel if we are self-loving beings, and it is a self-loving being that can admit our mistakes and our faults and be regenerative in that. And so I do think all of us yearn for potency, and all of us yearn for connection to something wider than just our own little silo. And if we can root ourselves, all of us, more in that, we're going to be able to handle the rattling in the cage of others with more grace and less fear. You know, like, and I think a lot of people go into the fight without the ground, and it keeps everything spinning. And there's such a suspicion of self-love. If we've made things so terrible, how can we love ourselves, you know? But I think we're just throwing ourselves back out into the dark in that view, because I all think, bottom line, all of us, all human beings want some basic things, you know? And to handle challenge, and which we're going to have to more and more, and to readdress the extreme inequities, you know, that are around all of this stuff. Like, it's going to take some steadiness and staying power and self-loving principles to really hear and move things along in the direction they need to be moved along. You know, so I think we all underestimate that we do need, that we all need. And there's nothing wrong in needing, it's beautiful. Sustenance, you know, genuine sustenance. Again, not this sort of quasi sustenance that we see now that's, you know, like quick porn or quick drugs or quick, you know, all of these things that I don't even actually have a necessary judgment about, but I think we use a lot of cartoon characters to answer our hungers. And again, we don't get to the real meetings that really do flood us with honey, you know?
Yeah. And then I guess to bring it back to your life's work, for you, meditative practice is probably the perfect gateway for you, or, you know, of how you sort of see these things is kind of developing that capacity for practice and these qualities. This is sort of what you would say is largely the cultivator of those qualities in order to live a life that, you know, the tap is open and it's dripping.
I think it probably, it's probably been my home base, in the sense that I remember a boyfriend actually when I was like 27 or something asking me, like, because I've written a lot, I've always been writing, went to art school as well as all the meditation, and saying, you know, would you prefer to die with the pen in your hand or a good breath or something? Oh, wow. And I remember just saying straight away, good breath, but I will also hold my pen, you know, something like that. Yeah. But I think, you know, to live well, the ground that the meditative processes can give you, and the well springs that can arise from the depth of your being when you're willing to let go and trust life a bit more, then can inform all of these other things that are equally as important. But I think as the sort of main ground practice to keep growing within, for me, has been the sort of baseline. But absolutely have been supported and assisted greatly by other modes of inquiry. Yeah. Be your life, you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, it's been so beautiful to have you in here. I love your teachings. This is like, as I said before, kind of bringing a wealth of tradition into a modern context. You know, I just love it's earthy and real and modern and right here, and it's just been a pleasure to talk to you. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I love talking with you. It's just so easy and very fluid, and it's so nice to be sitting in your room where you care for people and talk to people. Yeah. It's hard work. You know? So, so nice to be sitting on this yellow chair, blue chair. That's interesting. It's interesting because in the Tibetan tradition, you know, you've got colours for different states of mind, and yellow is ratna, like earth, which is sort of like abundance and kind of like fullness, you know. They've all got their shadows too. And blue that you're sitting on is like Vajra, is like this clear diamond-like mind that can cut through bullshit. And see things as they are. The Vajra mind. Anyway, earth has like water, like clear. So blue and yellow.
Blue is clear mind. That's abundance and earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
I remember that. That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're wearing. No, we're both wearing blue.
We got some blue going on.
We got some blue going on. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you, and thanks for listening, everyone. Yeah.
So rich.